My name is Christine Harding. I am the Director of Communication and Marketing for the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation, and we welcome you to our cyber chat. Today, you've got a treat because we have Wade Forbes, who is currently working as an independent consultant to U.S. Cybercom, where he works on plan, strategy, and policy director as a red team practitioner on the design team. And for the past 10 years, Wade has offered his colleagues alternative analysis, unorthodox thought pieces, and offering illustrations depicting our current thinking about issues that are elusive and difficult to solve. So his topic today is being a skeptic with finesse, becoming a red teamer. And Wade, the floor is yours.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. We're going to get into a really neat topic today. And what I will say in the very beginning is the biggest value of red teaming that it's taught me is entertaining multiple outcomes. So on the heels of a really big day in the United States history yesterday, and as the votes are tallied, red teaming can actually help people wrestle with decisions like this and other things that they're going through. So I'm going to get my slides here. So I titled my topic today being red teaming, being a skeptic with finesse, because to do red teaming, you have to really be mindful of the relationships you're creating. So skeptic with finesse is really somebody that can offer alternatives and ideas to you without getting you really frustrated or agitated or not wanting to talk to them. So we're going to jump right in here and have some fun. So a little bit about me. I've been working with the intelligence community in the Department of Defense for about 16 years. And about 3.5 years ago, I started diversifying a little bit and going off into the commercial sector and working with some nonprofits just to kind of perfect my craft. I have a really non-traditional background. I have a theater degree and I was an art major, and I started doing some work with a consultant called Booz Allen Hamilton. It's a worldwide strategic consulting firm in 2004. And they were fortunate enough to bring me in with a completely non-traditional background as a creative and pair me up with some military folks to kind of disrupt their processes. So I've been doing it my entire career just naturally because I haven't been trained like the other people on the team. Right now, a lot of what I do is it's a field called graphic recording. I'm a professional listener. I listen to meetings and I draw during the meetings, and I give people an artifact of what their thinking looks like to kind of help them work through it. I read a ton. I have an awesome network. And I'm a thinker who draws. You're going to see quotes on the right of the screen on all of my slides. I've been drawing every single day a quote during COVID to kind of help me reflect, help me go through this really unique time when we have a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. Our minds gravitate towards fear. But what I want to talk to you about today is how can we use our imaginations for good? How can we start to see all the good possibilities that are also possible? If I gave you a list of all the ways things could go wrong, it'd be hundreds of items. If I gave you a list of all the things that could go well, it'd be harder to put that list together. It'd be harder to come up with those items. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. So the origins of red teaming actually stems from the Catholic Church, and it's called the devil's advocate. So imagine they wanted to promote a saint in the church or bring somebody into a position. There were typically lots of people in the church that said, oh man, Wade is a great candidate for this position. We absolutely think he's the next person in line. He should have this opportunity. They identified one person in that group to say all the reasons why Wade would not be the ideal candidate. And they'd have to come up with maybe personality traits that I have that are not going to make me a good listener, or maybe some choices that I make, or my ability to kind of crumble under pressure. So the devil's advocate was born out of those types of practices. And it's been in our history in a lot of different places over the years, but it was never truly formalized in a way that we could sink our teeth into until after the 9/11 Commission report. So it's really easy to look at bad things that happen and have lots of opinions on them. Remember, when we reflect on these things, people are very, very critical because they were never there in the beginning. But the 9/11 Commission said we did not have enough people licensed to be troublesome in our government. We didn't have enough people that were challenging our assumptions, helping us with our plans, giving us unpopular viewpoints, empathy with our enemy in order for us to approach something that was just a horrible day in our history. So the 9/11 Commission said we need folks that are going to be traditionally trained to do this work for us. And that's where the University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies was stood up. And that's out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. It was an element of the Army. And they trained people like me in how to do this in a formal way. We read tons of books. We did lots of papers. We learned how to offer alternative analysis, strategic decision support, unpopular viewpoints in a room full of people that were all agreeing on the same things and didn't want to upset one another. And it was a really valuable 6 weeks of my life. There are some courses there that can go on for as long as 12 weeks. And something crazy that happened recently is the Army decided they couldn't pay for it anymore. So you're going to hear a little bit more about why it's important in this briefing, and you're going to learn a little about why it's important for us to constantly challenge ourselves. And so the last thing I'll say about red teaming is some of you that are in cybersecurity, the good news is you're thinking, well, red teaming, that's pen testing. When an organization hires you to infiltrate their networks and to show them what their vulnerabilities look like. Both definitions are correct. I don't know why they named it red teaming when the Army had a chance to name it when it was already known in the cybersecurity world as pen testing, but it is, both terms are correct. So if you hear red teaming elsewhere and you're learning it, fantastic. It is pen testing, but it's also what I'm going to talk about today. So where does red teaming begin? Sometimes we're working on things and we know that it's the wrong way to do it. And we know that it's not getting us the results we want, yet we do it anyway. So I call that we've lost the plot. So there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of things going on in the story, but nobody understands why, and it's not a great story, and we start to lose the bigger picture. But that's where red teaming comes in, where you identify someone in an organization that can help you disrupt it naturally, stuff that I do. Red teaming begins with a sponsor. So people say, well, what's a sponsor? Sponsor is somebody that says, I want you, Wade, to work with these teams on disrupting the processes so they don't get caught in their own patterns. I want you, I'm paying you, I'm hiring you, I'm designating you to be that individual who's going to do that for this organization. And the beauty of it is when there's a large team. The challenge I've had in my career is I'm a red guy. And a red guy doing red teaming means it's just my ideas for other people. But when you can get a group of people doing this that have a diverse background, it's unbelievably successful and very, very rewarding. It'll probably be the best job you could have with your career, quite frankly. The government, you'll find, the more work you do with them, is widely known for starting new organizations. So sometimes my challenge with the government is they'll start a new organization without getting rid of the one that wasn't performing the way they wanted to. So a lot of times red teaming can be really valuable when you're standing up new organizations to make sure you're not repeating some of the same history, or that you're able to see things in a new way or not fall into the same predictable patterns, which is wonderful for the enemy, but not great for us. So here's where my job gets really interesting. A lot of my red teaming happens in the hallways after a meeting. You'll say, well, what is that? I'll tell you what it means. It's you sit at a meeting for an hour and you hear some ideas and you hear the direction that people are going to go in and nobody's really happy about it. And then everybody gets into the hallway and they talk about why those are not great ideas, what could work better, how we should try something different instead. But nobody's empowered or brave enough to speak up. And so that's where the red teamer comes in. Imagine being in a room of 100 people talking to a 4-star general. Incredibly exciting and a neat way to just want to make sure if there's any comments or questions in the room that I can see them too. So please just speak up and let me know, moderators. But if somebody's not speaking up in a room, they would turn to me and say, Wade, tell me what nobody else is saying. And it's an honor, but it's also sad because why would 60 to 100 people not be comfortable to speak up if they hear or see something that's not working? So that's when red teaming is really helpful. Something I said earlier in the conversation, red teaming is great when there's multiple outcomes. So 4 years ago in our election, the idea of a businessman running the country and the idea of a first female president was incredibly exciting, and entertaining those multiple outcomes of what would happen if either candidate took office and how it would have an impact on the United States government and relationships with other countries. That's not easy for a lot of people to do because we start to believe over time as if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it, but we forget about all the other factors that are in the world that are going to prevent us from possibly achieving something like that. And red teaming begins when there's too much disruption in our lives. Sometimes we like to just keep things really simple and we want to call it normal, and there is no such thing. Over time, as a red teamer, the more that you learn and the more that you read about the way the human brain works, red teaming is a great activity to do when we have a really big mess up. Something I mentioned earlier is it's really tricky that everybody's really, really, really smart after we make a mistake, but nobody was there in the very beginning. We're trying to capture those moments of what it's like in the beginning. How can we make a decision that's really solid decision so that we don't fall into some bad habits. And lastly, wargaming. Such a cool thing that the military does. I hope that all of you have a chance to do something like that in your careers, especially if you're looking into cybersecurity. But wargaming is a chance to just play out all these possibilities. And what I love to do in war games and why people hate it when I show up sometimes is because war games are scripted. Here are the moves that we're going to make. Here are the responses we're going to have. And here's what the possible outcomes are going to be. That sounds great, but unfortunately, real life doesn't work that way. So having a red teamer to disrupt in those war games, some of the most fun I've had in my red teaming career, and a great way to see different things kind of shape up. So successful red teaming, you gotta start small. So imagine for a moment that I tell you, okay, you've just been hired by the National Security Agency. You can do some work in cybersecurity. I'm really excited for you. Go forth and conquer. And the first thing you do is you say, all right, I'm a brand new employee and I'm going to red team the NSA. Not going to go well. First off, you have to do a lot of things before you can begin red teaming. You have to realize that it does start small because you have to develop a reputation. You have to be able to make some outreach and some relationships with people, but you got to start small and you have to do your homework. The first time I did a red team activity after getting hired, I walked into a room and instead of just dropping maybe a couple of breadcrumbs of red teaming, I was accused of dropping a nuclear bomb, which means I went way too big, I hadn't done my homework. I didn't show up prepared, and it was really valuable for me to have that initial experience. So doing your homework, developing a reputation, doing the right outreach. Red teaming with strangers is really, really hard. If I got on this call today and I told everybody who are running these courses how they're doing it incorrectly and alternative ideas, it probably wouldn't be well received because I don't run courses like this. I have no empathy that I could offer those individuals. What I need to do is get to know the individuals, understand their world, understand their processes, and start small. When you help decision makers obtain more information, everybody wins. But some decision makers then get stuck with all they can do is collect information. So red teamers can help with that when you can say, here are the thresholds you need to look at. Here are some opportunities that you might not have seen. But helping decisions obtain more information that's going to be helpful for them is really valuable. And what successful red teaming can be. Improving stale conversation, getting others to speak up, and the engaging storytelling is one of my favorite things to do. When I look at an incident, the problem that the intelligence community sometimes runs into is that they only are looking at what the intelligence is telling them. So imagine you're collecting conversations from, we'll say Canada, because that's not happening. But let's say you're collecting conversations from Canada and you're starting to paint a picture of how that could be a threatening situation developing from the United States. If you only listen to the conversations happening in Canada, you're missing a lot of other things. You're missing what's happening with the United States participation in Canada's conversation. What are all the other conversations that Canada is having? It's not just a conversation between 1 and 2. So you develop an ability to tell stories as a red teamer over time that can really, really, really get exciting and give a completely different picture that people weren't expecting. So let's talk about what core red teaming looks like. Red teaming is a leader is going to look at you and wants to share some information with you where they're really vulnerable and they need your trust. So I'm going to tell you right now, in cybersecurity, you're going to encounter a lot of people that did not train to be in those positions. So there are some people out there have been pushed to the front of an organization and they have no idea that cyber is even spelled with a C. And I tell you that story not because those people have made a mistake or people have done things wrong, but you have to do the best with what you have, and a red teamer can help with that. But if a leader is telling you that they're not equipped for a position or they're having a difficult time and you mishandle that vulnerability and trust, you're dead in the water. The people that trained me in red teaming, God bless them, they thought the best red teaming they could do is when they get kicked out of the room or off of a project, and they bragged about it. And I'll tell you, you can't improve the conversation or the thinking of the conversation or the quality of a conversation when you're not allowed in. So Skeptic with Finesse is hugely important if you're going to be using these techniques that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. Some of the red teamers I've worked with thought if they talked more than everybody else, they would be seen as incredibly smart and really witty and have all the answers. And I'll tell you, I'm uncomfortable in this conversation because I have to do the most talking because the last 10 or 12 years of my career I've spent listening. And now I do it as somebody who draws the conversation, so I'm listening even more without any speaking. But I'll tell you, after I listen to a group for 2 hours and then I have something to say, I've earned my right to speak. So red teamers have to earn it, just like everybody else. Not following through. So red teamers love to say, here are some ways your situation could be improved. See ya. And they walk away and they're done. And that's not going to help an organization succeed. If I say you might be missing these things about North Korea, you might have overlooked the significance of this event with China. And I follow up 2 months later on that conversation. It's way more powerful than I just walk in the room, drop some knowledge bombs, and I'm out. So that follow through is hugely important. And lastly, poor red teaming is knowing when to walk away. So what happened to me in Cyber Command is just where I've worked, but they're not necessarily unique in this situation. There were some individuals they love the idea of having red teamers around. There's some that don't. That's okay. That's life. But if I stayed and I screamed and I was yelling, red teaming, we're here, we need you to hear us, that doesn't help anybody. So sometimes you have to know when to walk away and you have to try some other things and move on to a different organization. All right. I love this part. Red team techniques. So this whole time you're thinking, okay, Wade, alternative ideas, devil's advocacy, that sounds really cool. How do you do it? Pre-mortem analysis was a technique that was developed by the University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies. So in 2007, a long time ago, now it seems, there was an invasion in Baghdad. And the United States military went through Baghdad and they said, okay, we need to make some changes in Iraq. We need to address some concerns that we're having. And they toppled the government and they toppled the city and they got on the other side of the city and they said, oh boy, we have a big problem here. We don't know how to govern these people. We just destroyed a lot of buildings that we have to repair. We just changed the entire trajectory of another nation in the Middle East. What are we going to do? And those army planners said, there's a couple ways we could do this. We could walk away and just say, good luck out there, or we could develop techniques so that we are never in this position again. And it's very admirable. Some of the founding fathers of red teaming worked on these techniques to make sure that we don't put ourselves in situations like this again. Pre-mortem analysis is planning backwards from failure. So failure in some cases is if you win the battle and you haven't paid attention to what happens when the battle is won. All you focus on is the fact that you won it, that you dominated, but now you have a lot of work to do. And did you even think about that in your initial plan? Nobody's right or wrong, but how does this improve us? Red teaming is how we make the world less wrong. We're never going to be 100% right. We're just trying to get things less wrong. Alternative futures analysis. So let's say I ask you to do a vulnerability study for my organization. So I have a small company and my wife and I work for it. And I say, okay, I need some vulnerability analysis. Can you offer me what some of the outcomes are? Some of you might just look at, all right, Wade, you don't have enough security on your computers. You have way too much exposure on your website. And that's it. Some of you might say, this is the income you're going to lose. This is how you're going to lose. Your clients are going to lose confidence in you because you're not secure. And you're going to start to look at the whole picture and you're going to offer a number of different alternatives to me. So alternative futures analysis has to be bound in the conversation, but sometimes a lot of people will go for the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff. But I mean, what's the real story here and on the alternative futures analysis that you can offer? Murder Your Darlings is a combination of techniques that I gained from a lot of the different books that I was reading at the time. I bring a lot of books with me. As you can see, I have a lot of them here. Some are still in my office at the agency. But killing off what you cherish most in an organization is one of the ways that you can really disrupt a conversation or a process or a group of people. And it sounds harsh, but sometimes that's what you need to do. If you're familiar with Toyota cars, they disrupt themselves constantly. So they've got this great car, everybody loves to drive it, and they change the body style, they change the guts of the car, and the other auto manufacturers saying, Toyota, you're already number one. Why do you keep doing this? And they say, because when we get stale and we get flat-footed is when we lose this number one status. So killing off what you cherish most can sometimes be one of the most important things that you'll do in an organization or a particular problem that you're trying to solve. 4 ways of seeing. I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. And lastly, think, write, share. So you guys, thank God, you go to a lot of classes, many of you students, but you don't have to go to a lot of meetings. Now imagine I send you to a meeting with 20 people and I tell everybody to start talking. A lot of people are going to say, what am I getting myself into? I don't know if I want this career anymore. But imagine if I brought you to a meeting and I posed a problem or a challenge that we're having on a particular project or developing a product. And I said, let's think about it for the next half hour and write it down and then share it. A lot of times when you can get people away from talking and giving you incomplete thoughts and just filling the space, because silence makes people uncomfortable, and you give them a chance to think and write and share, you tell them to be quiet and let the noise go for a moment and just be there with your thoughts. So the 4 ways of seeing is such a valuable technique in so many different facets of your life. You can do this with friendships. You can do this with relationships. You can do this with a project. You can do this with an enemy. But how you see yourself and how they see themselves, and then how they see you and how you see them. So when I go to war games and I do this, this is an opportunity for empathy, which is kind of a scary word sometimes in the military, because good, bad, or indifferent over time, what's happened is that in a lot of their leadership manuals, a lot of those emotional terms have been taken out. If you've ever listened to any books or studied Brene Brown, she talks about when you take those emotional words out of our leadership manuals and it just becomes managing humans, you miss a lot of things. And so sometimes understanding the 4 ways of seeing and how an enemy sees you and how you see them can reveal things that you never would have thought about. When I sit in a meeting and I say, okay, a Russian soldier hired by the Russian government is trying to defend their country. They're passionate about going on vacations. They want to have a family and be happy and go to school and study things and read books just like us. That shouldn't be a shocking statement to somebody. But when all you've ever looked at is the fact that the Russians are your enemy or the Chinese are your enemy, you forget that there's real life involved. It's not always just a military to military conversation. So this is a tremendous opportunity for people to start seeing situations unfold differently. Now, it's not always that simple, but it's valuable in many moments. So where does red teaming end? I'm just looking at the time here. We're getting close to 12 o'clock, so I want to make sure that I'm leaving time for questions, because I'm trying to condense a 12-year career into a quick webinar, and I haven't had to do this before. So say the red teaming ends when your sponsor leaves. I've had tremendous relationships with people and organizations over the years. And when they move on, I know it's time that probably for me to move on if the sponsoring of red teaming is shifted. Sometimes it can become stale. When you've worked yourself out of a job, so that's a time to celebrate and pat yourself on the back. The comment I made earlier about being a red guy in an organization, if I can have everybody doing red team techniques, so today a great outcome would be all of you know how to do the techniques, you understand the role, you understand how somebody could call you somebody doing red teaming, and then all of your colleagues and friends are doing it. That's fantastic. You don't need somebody like me. It never should have been one person's responsibility, because everybody's ideas, everybody's creativity, everybody's expertise is going to bring a better outcome, not just mine. So second bullet was when it's happening naturally in the organization. And then a lot of times when red teaming is happening successfully in another organization, people get wind about it. They get wind of it. They say, we need you. We need you here. Can you come help us do this? And so it's important to know when another group needs you and when to leave. And then sometimes you just run out of things to say. So I would encourage you to imagine those as possible reasons to know when it ends. Time for your questions. My daily quotes are here. And when I say make sure that your life is worth watching, I'm really excited I got to contribute this to the United States government. And just being myself and being creative, I think it's a mistake if we get lured into this, well, this is how we've always hired people, and these are the only type of people that can help. I'm here today. I'm living proof. I have a theater degree. My job was to act on stage, and I'm working in the United States government with the military to help them see things differently as a team, not to criticize them. But I was never in the military, and I had a lot of things I could offer them. So let's get started with some questions and see how I can expand the conversation.
Hey, Wade, we have a question here that asks if you had to give advice to the high schooler on what they should do to prepare themselves for getting into red teaming or getting into cybersecurity, what would that be?
A high schooler who's looking for a trajectory towards red teaming, I would say be careful about putting all your eggs in one basket. If you're studying cybersecurity, don't be afraid to study human behavior. So I took certified ethical hacker training and I passed all those tests. I have all those textbooks, but I also studied the hackers and what is in the mind of a hacker that would cause them to do that. So we vilify hackers a lot of times when in reality, they're trying to fix things. So in the early 2000s, a hacker would walk into Barnes and Nobles and they'd see those computers that they had in certain sections, and they would see if they could log on to that computer. And if they could, they'd look at customer information. They'd walk over to the manager of the store and they'd say, "Excuse me, I just wanted to let you know this terminal was not secured here and you have a problem here because customer information is exposed." As a manager, do you want to hear that? Absolutely. But then what happens if you don't? What happens if that manager doesn't want to hear it? You have to understand how to present those ideas. You have to understand how to do that in a non-threatening way. You have to understand how to do it lawfully. So understanding cybersecurity techniques in order to infiltrate the system, but understanding human behavior and how to offer the information is hugely important. So I would say make sure if you're studying something really technical that you don't forget about the human side on the other end. So read lots of books on human bias, cognitive thinking, design thinking, in addition to your cybersecurity studies. Don't get lost in the people.
Yeah, we have another question that says, how would high schoolers get involved in red teaming on virtual machines and Kali Linux in high school environment without scaring admin or IT?
Great question. So when I talked about getting a sponsor earlier, if you want to do that penetration style red teaming, you just want to come up with some rules in advance. So you want to say, let me see if I can do this while on a virtual machine or using Kali Linux inside this environment. And you probably want to draft up a little bit of a list of rules on how you're going to do it, and then make sure that people that own the system have signed it and have seen it. There's a lot of hackers out there that want to help, and sometimes you know who those hackers are. And then there's some hackers out there that will not give their real identity and try to help. And that can be very intimidating and scary. And so when I said earlier, vulnerability and trust, imagine you make somebody look really, really dumb on your school network. That's not going to improve the conversation. But imagine you get them to agree in advance that you're going to try these things to see if it's possible and make sure that the school is secure. And then something bad happens. You've already talked about it. You're not going to humiliate them. You're not going to make them feel worse, because running a school is not a cybersecurity expert. And cybersecurity has made all these experts have to be able to do both. And that's not fair. So if I'm going to hack a bank, that banker is an expert at taking care of money. They're not an expert in cybersecurity and understanding the vulnerabilities and the threats out there. So you got to handle that with grace and be delicate.
We have another question that said, give us a story about one of the great hacks or red teaming that you did. And I'll add a little caveat, obviously at the unclassified level.
I would say one of my favorite stories probably I was in a war game in Europe, and I won't tell you where. And in Europe, they have to consider all the equities that the United States has for the military bases that are out there. And so we had a big problem with some things that were going on. And by not telling you the year, I can help obfuscate what it was. But throughout the whole exercise, the military was behaving as if all of these troops were still there, and you had this huge force that could move to this port or to this border and to do this thing. And when I started peeling back how many troops were in Europe when they started the conversation versus how many troops were in Europe at that current time, there was a difference of 300,000 in their number. And when I revealed the 4 ways of seeing, I mentioned it in my presentation as a red teamer, and the general slammed his fist down and said, "Where is this coming from? Why are you saying that the United States is timid and is considered timid and gun shy?" I said, "Because you have 300,000 less troops in Europe right now to deal with these challenges. So how is that going to change the way you plan?" And the entire trajectory of the war game changed. And here's one thing that happened that was absolutely amazing, and that I wish it upon anybody. The stress in the room was gone, because they had to behave a certain way and they had to project a certain amount of force. But when they could start having a real conversation, they could see the safety. They could see the partnership. They could see that they had to shift their mindset. So I didn't just come in and drop a bomb and say, "Good luck, guys, because you got it all wrong." But it's how do we start to trust one another and realize that we're going to only be able to do certain things with that many troops and not the number we thought we had. And sometimes not everybody has the same amount of information. It's very stressful to answer to leaders sometimes. And just like you have to answer to your teachers, it can be stressful for you. And if you have the wrong information, you made a lot of assumptions and nobody challenged it, that can be a big bummer, but it doesn't have to stay that way when you designate somebody who can give you an alternative perspective.
That's a great answer, Wade. While we're waiting for a couple of more questions, I have one for you. I really enjoyed your comment up early about being the one in the room that can really share truth. And sometimes the generals or the leaders don't get that information. And I can't tell you how many times in my career when I've had the opportunity to talk to seniors and they say, no one is telling me that, et cetera. So could you unpack that a little bit more for these students about this skill or this approach to participation, in that it really is important to share all the information so that leaders can make good decisions?
So how do you get real talk to these leaders, I think is how I'm going to approach your question. So when I get into an organization, I like to ask leaders, what are their pet peeves? What are some things that really frustrate you and things that make it harder for you to do your job or more frustrating? And I take those answers and then I first make sure that I'm never going to cause one of those things, especially if I'm going to tell them something they don't want to hear. But in doing that, it brings the human side back into it. So when you're working with a 4-star general, in the case of the United States military, 4-star general has typically been in the United States military for 30 to 35 years. They've seen a lot, they've done a lot, but they still just want to be human a lot of times. And when you're developing that rapport and doing that outreach and getting that reputation, when you walk into the room, you're trying to make sure they know that you have their best interest in mind. So a lot of my job is caveats. And a caveat is what I'm about to say is going to be frustrating when you first hear it. You might need to give me 2 or 3 tries to say it, but I promise it's going to help you with this problem. And when I can disarm them a little bit and say, I'm not a salesman. I don't have 30 seconds to nail my pitch. Just give me a second to talk. Give me a little bit of your time to talk about these things on some things you might have overlooked in a clumsy way. It's going to be all right. We're in this together. Having to say those things was important to me. And when the leaders don't want to hear them, and depending on how they react, I know if this is a place for red teaming. I'll have to tell you that when I worked for those leaders, I didn't run in the room screaming, I'm red teaming. I just had to do it and offer that information to them in a way to help. There were some times, we've all heard of denial of service attacks. And in 2013, there were Iranian cyber actors that were sending denial of service attacks to the financial sector on Wall Street. It was all unclassified. And you had to look at the amount of bots that they were sending. And instead of looking at all the bots that they were sending and all the bandwidth that they were going to disrupt and destroy, I remember saying their .com, which means it's not the military's purview. So take pause there, because we have to let the commercial entities that are responsible deal with it. The second thing I remember saying is we need to look at our own networks and see what bandwidth upgrades we need to make. And in that conversation, I said, instead of doing the natural progression where we do an upgrade here, an upgrade here, an upgrade here in the next 5 years, what if we just skip to the 5th year to make sure that we can handle it? And people said, you're an intelligence analyst. You're not a budget analyst. Why would you tell us how to do that? And I said, because it's my job to look at a bigger picture. I'm not beholden to the same thing. So when you start to look at programmatics and other things outside of your natural role as a red teamer, you can bring a lot of information together quickly. So leaders appreciate that, some more than others.
Yeah, I really liked your caveat aspect, and maybe that's something for the students to take away from this as well. Is when you're about to deliver information that somebody may or may not want, making sure that they understand. And I really appreciate your comment that we're all on the same team here, and that we're participating in this discussion. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Absolutely. Neutral ground. So let's say you want to talk to one of your teachers in their classroom, or you want to talk to them in the hallway. When you're walking in the hallway and having a difficult conversation, your body is moving. The endorphins are releasing in your body. You feel better because you're in action. But if I go into a place that's intimidating, where that teacher could feel defensive and they feel safe and they might not want to hear something, and I'm saying teachers because you could offer red teaming to your school, to your institution, to your education program, but doing it in the right way, saying, I'd like to talk to you about something that's going to be difficult for me to say. So if you could give me a couple tries and we could just go for a walk, I think it'd be easier for me to tell you some things that may be difficult to hear, but know that it could make things better than they are right now. Practicing those things with other people, hugely important. As an actor, all my theater books are below me on these shelves here, but I had to rehearse those lines. I had to rehearse how I wanted things to unfold. And then you get into the corporate environment and they're like, okay, go. And you're like, no, wait, I'm not ready yet. So the preparation for those conversations are hugely important too. Caveats, you can't put a price on them. If you can learn how to do them at an early age, I think it's going to improve your communication skills immensely.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat room. So let me just kind of put it out there to the students here. Happy to respond. Wade will respond to any questions you have. So please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. And while you're thinking about that, I'll just join Wade in the fact that cybersecurity profession is broader than just sitting behind a computer. Various different backgrounds. I mean, Wade was in theater, etc. And Wade, by the way, I join you in that. I have done many stage productions, and I enjoy that environment as well. And so the skill sets that cybersecurity needs are very broad. So there's a place for you in cybersecurity, and with over 500,000 openings today, we need you in cybersecurity. Go to cyberseek.org, cyberseek.org, and it will show you all the over 500,000 jobs, where they are in the country, what type of educational background you need, what type of certifications you need, and you can get a job right out of high school just by going to CyberSeek and looking at those and then searching. So I think maybe I delayed enough, and it looks like we don't have any questions. So, Wade, I'll let Christine take us out, and I really appreciate you being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. This was an honor. It was very exciting to kind of relive some of these memories of mine and to share it. And I'm putting my contact information on here if people would like to learn more and chat with me more. I'm always open to do something like that. And it's I'm happy to hear people have these conversations and these trade-offs that they're making when thinking about a career in cybersecurity. It's a lot of fun.
I like your last graphic. Wake up and start chasing them. Just don't dream them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's half the battle. We have these moments in our lives that are pivotal where you kind of wish you would have said something. And I'm telling you, I have a career field for you in red teaming where don't wish you said it, just say it and see what happens. And it might be what everybody in the room is thinking, and you broke the ice and the conversation was better. I mean, the general is talking about what I said at 9:30 at night instead of what the analyst said is exciting, but we could all do that for one another, improve the conversation.
And it saves lives.
It does.
Yep.
Cybersecurity. I mean, just one more comment. There's a great program. It's called the White Collar Workforce, and it's being run by organizations like IBM, Amazon, Microsoft, where they're helping identify talent in high schools, take them through an associate's degree, and at 20 years old, there are people that are making six figures doing cybersecurity work with them. But I sometimes challenge, maybe we have too many cybersecurity dependencies in our world, and how should we be challenged in that when Steve Jobs wouldn't allow his children to have iPhones or iPads or iPods? It was because of what it did to them socially. Mm-hmm. So when I say that to people, they look at me and say, wait, hey, you're working us out of a job. And I said, I know. Yeah. Maybe you don't need a cybersecurity dependency in your particular world, but we've just done it because of those pressures.
We got a question again. And what's the name of that program again?
It's called the White Collar Workforce. If you do some searches on it, it was basically efforts between Fortune 500 companies to identify high school talent, take them through an associate's degree where they're paying for it sometimes. So they had groups of they had success stories like Starbucks baristas that got identified, went through the cybersecurity training, and then were making six figures to share their ideas with Microsoft and others. So it's just another option that's out there, but it was they were calling it the White Collar Workforce, which I thought was interesting. I actually drew that session about a year and a half ago. Yeah. Not everybody you don't need a 4-year degree for cybersecurity.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you again, Wade. I really appreciate that we were finally able to schedule this with you. Thank you all students and teachers that have joined us as well. Again, I want to mention that next week we actually have a number of cybersecurity career awareness talks that we'll be having. So please check out our schedule on Nepris. And thanks again for joining us. We all appreciate you joining us from the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.